John had always believed his land was safe. For generations, his family's modest house had stood firmly on that stretch of earth. Nestled among towering oaks and wildflower patches, it wasn't much, but it was home. The kind of place where memories clung to the walls and stories whispered through the creaking floorboards. For decades, John had lived quietly, tending his garden, fixing the old fence, and enjoying the gentle rhythms of country life. But everything changed the day Karen arrived. It wasn't the kind of arrival that made a splash. No moving truck, blaring music, or neighbors throwing welcoming parties. Karen's arrival was quiet, almost too quiet. She appeared one afternoon with a strange, deliberate calmness, surveying the neighborhood like a hawk sizing up prey. She bought the house next door, an old neglected property that had sat empty for years. To John, she seemed just another, new neighbor at first. But then, small things began to unsettle him. It started with the way Karen watched his property from her porch. Her gaze sharp and unblinking. When John waved hello, she'd smile. But it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that felt like a warning. Then there were the subtle, inexplicable changes around the boundary between their homes. One morning, John noticed a new fence post where there hadn't been one the day before. No note, no warning, just a weathered wooden stake shoved into the ground, inching closer to his garden than it should have. Confused, John went over to Karen's porch to ask about it. "Just marking the line," she said smoothly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But her tone held an edge that made John uneasy. He shrugged it off, thinking maybe the previous owners had left a vague boundary. Or maybe it was a simple misunderstanding. Yet over the following weeks, the stakes multiplied, creeping slowly, steadily closer to his house. John's friends began to notice the tension too. At the local diner, whispers swirled. "Did you see Karen's fence? I heard she's buying more land. I wouldn't trust her if I were you." But John didn't want to believe it. Karen seemed polite when they crossed paths at the mailbox, and for a while, that was enough to keep the uneasy feelings at bay. Then, strange things started happening around his property. Tools went missing. A hammer here, a wheelbarrow there. His garden hose was mysteriously kinked one morning, and the gate to his backyard was left unlocked overnight. Nothing overt, nothing threatening, but enough to make John's skin crawl. It was as if someone was inching inside his life, testing the boundaries. One evening, John came home late from work to find Karen standing near his driveway. She looked up and smiled, but this time, the smile chilled him. "You know," she said, softly, stepping closer. "Land like this is rare these days. I just hope you're not planning to keep it all to yourself." John's heart thudded. Was this a warning, a challenge? He didn't answer. Inside his house, he locked every door and window twice. He sat by the window, watching Karen retreat to her own home, her silhouette sharp against the glow of her porch light. The air between their properties felt charged. A silent standoff he didn't understand. That night, John lay awake, a knot tightening in his stomach. Something was wrong. Karen wasn't just a new neighbor. She was a storm on the horizon, dark and unpredictable, and he was standing right in its path. The next morning, John woke with a sense of unease gnawing at him. Karen's presence was no longer just a vague worry. It was a threat looming just beyond the fence line. But how far would she go? And why? He stepped outside, rubbing his eyes against the pale dawn light, and immediately noticed something new. There, planted firmly into his side of the yard, was a bright, freshly painted white fence. It wasn't just a single stake anymore. Karen had erected a full barrier, dividing the properties with an almost aggressive neatness. John's heart sank. This fence wasn't just a boundary marker, it was a statement. She was claiming ground, inch by inch. He paced the length of the fence, measuring with his eyes. It cut through his garden, slicing off a corner of his prized rose bushes, and edging uncomfortably close to his porch steps. It was bold, almost mocking. The knot in his stomach tightened. "This can't be legal," he muttered. Without thinking twice, John marched over to Karen's house. The morning sun glinted off her freshly painted windows, and he wondered how someone could seem so calm while encroaching on his land. Karen opened the door before he could even knock. Her smile was slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that held secrets. "Morning, John," she said, voice smooth as silk. "I see you noticed the fence." He swallowed hard. "Karen, this is on my property. I'm pretty sure you don't have the right to put up a fence there." She tilted her head slightly, considering him. "Oh, John, property lines can be tricky, can't they? Sometimes they're not as clear as we think. Maybe you should double-check your deeds." John's jaw clenched. "I've checked them, several times." Karen's eyes gleamed. "Well then, maybe it's time we settle this properly." Before he could ask what she meant, she closed the door gently but firmly. John stood on her porch, stunned. Returning to his own yard, John noticed a few of his neighbors gathering nearby. Whispers followed him like shadows. "Did you see what Karen did? That fence cuts into John's land for sure." One said, "Maybe. She's got some kind of deal we don't know about." Another murmured. John's mind raced. Could Karen have some hidden papers? Had his family's land been in dispute all along without him knowing? The thought was unsettling. Over the next few days, John tried to remain calm, but Karen's actions only grew more deliberate. One afternoon, John found his garden hose slashed, its length spilling useless water into the dirt. His gate lock was mysteriously broken. Though nothing else was stolen, it felt like a warning, a message he couldn't ignore. He reported the damage to the local sheriff, but the officer merely shook his head. "Without proof, it's your word against hers. These things happen." John's frustration deepened. He was being pushed out inch by inch, yet no one seemed willing to help. One evening, as John sat on his porch, Karen appeared across the fence, holding a cup of coffee. Her tone was casual but sharp. "You should consider selling, John. It's not worth the trouble, is it?" He glared at her. "This is my home." Karen smiled that cold smile again. "You say that now, but homes can change hands. Sometimes without you even realizing it." John's blood ran cold as days blurred into weeks. The line between neighborly dispute and hostile takeover blurred. The community that once welcomed John now whispered rumors about him, that he was difficult, uncooperative, and stubbornly clinging to a shrinking piece of land. John felt the walls closing in. Karen wasn't just moving fences. She was moving mountains, and he was running out of ground. One night, as he pored over old deeds and maps under the flicker of his desk lamp, John found a clue. A faded, almost illegible notation that hinted at a forgotten agreement. But before he could decipher it, a sudden knock on the door startled him. He opened it to find no one there, only a small envelope resting on the doorstep. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed and cold. "Vacate the premises immediately, or face legal action." The handwriting was unmistakably Karen's. John's hands trembled as he read the words over and over. The nightmare had begun, and it was only getting worse. John sat frozen at his kitchen table, the stark white paper shaking in his hands like a warning siren. "Vacate the premises immediately, or face legal action." The words echoed in his mind. A chilling decree from the woman who lived next door. The woman who was trying to steal his home. His heart pounded. Disbelief mixing with a growing sense of dread. How could Karen claim ownership of land that had been in his family for generations? The thought was absurd, yet here it was, staring him down in cold black letters. He looked around his small kitchen, the worn counters, the scratched floorboards, the faded family photos on the wall, all proof of a life built on this land. Could she really make him leave? His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer, Tom, a grizzled man who'd handled land disputes for years. John swallowed hard and dialed. "Tom, I got a notice today," he said, voice tight. "Karen's claiming I'm trespassing on her property. My house is on her land apparently." There was a long pause. Then Tom's voice came low and serious. "John, you need to get all your documents ready. Deeds, tax records, anything showing ownership. This could be the start of a serious legal battle." John nodded, even though Tom couldn't see him. "I'll gather everything." "But why now? What's she trying to do?" Tom sighed. "Some people see property as power, John. If she's smart, she's trying to wear you down, confuse you, and push you out." After the call, John felt the weight of the fight ahead settle over him. He knew Karen wasn't bluffing. She had resources, money, connections, and a ruthless determination he hadn't seen before. The next morning, John made his way to the county records office, digging through dusty files and yellowed papers. Hours passed as he searched for proof. A chain of deeds stretching back decades, tax receipts in his family's name, and maps outlining his land. Yet the more he looked, the more complicated it became. Some of the older documents were missing, or marked with strange annotations. A few records showed conflicting boundaries, and there was even a handwritten note from years ago mentioning a disputed property line. But nothing concrete. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Could someone have tampered with the records? Was there a hidden agreement he'd never known about? He thought back to Karen's cold smile, her cryptic warnings. When he returned home, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, watchful. He spotted Karen talking to the HOA president near the mailbox, her tone hushed but intense. Later that day, a certified letter arrived from the HOA. They cited multiple complaints from Karen about John's fences, his gardening, even his trash cans, and warned him that violations could lead to fines or legal restrictions. John's hands shook as he read the letter. Karen wasn't just using the courts. She was wielding the HOA like a weapon. Desperate, John went door to door, seeking support from neighbors. Some were sympathetic, but others avoided him, whispering doubts and rumors. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, pulled him aside. "John," she said softly, "I've known Karen a long time. She's not the sort to back down. She's got connections, and she's good at getting what she wants." John's hope dimmed. If Karen was playing for keeps, he was going to need more than deeds and maps. He needed allies. That night, as he sat by the window, staring at the harsh new fence slicing through his garden, John felt a cold truth settle in his bones. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about survival, and Karen was coming for everything. The days that followed felt like living in a nightmare John couldn't wake from. Karen's legal threat loomed over him like a storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. But John wasn't about to surrender his family home without a fight. He had to uncover the truth. Whatever it took. He spent hours in the cramped corners of the county archives, poring over old deeds, tax rolls, and survey maps. Each paper was brittle with age, edges curled and ink faded, but he scanned every word with desperate hope. It was there, buried beneath decades of bureaucracy, that John found a clue. a small yellowed note scribbled in the margin of a 1972 property survey. The note was almost indecipherable, but a few words stood out: boundary dispute, pending agreement, and a barely legible signature. His heart raced. Had someone tried to settle a dispute years ago, only for it to be forgotten? And who had signed this note? John reached out to the county survey office, hoping to find an original map. After a tense call, he learned the original documents had been archived separately, some even missing. Determined, John hired a professional surveyor to retrace his property lines. The surveyor, a no-nonsense woman named Lisa, was thorough. She paced the land with measuring tools, GPS devices, and a keen eye. When she finally handed John the survey results, his stomach sank. The new survey confirmed Karen's fence encroached significantly onto John's property. But there was more. Lisa pointed to a faint line on the old maps, indicating a narrow strip of land behind the house, adjacent to Karen's property, where ownership was unclear. The mystery line zigzagged oddly, as if something had been erased or altered. John's mind reeled. Could Karen be exploiting this grey area? Was this the loophole she'd used to claim his house was on her land? That night, as John sat in his dimly lit living room, he replayed the day's discoveries over and over. His family's history was tangled in this land, but so was someone else's secret. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." John's hands trembled. Was this from Karen, or someone else watching him from the shadows? Refusing to back down, John decided to dig deeper. He visited the local historical society, hoping to find records beyond the official archives. There, an elderly archivist named Mr. Harlan pulled out an old leather-bound book of property transactions. Flipping through the fragile pages, John found references to a hidden agreement between his family's ancestors and a mysterious third party. A deal never fully recorded or made public. The book hinted that the disputed land was once sold, then secretly repurchased, but the records were incomplete. John felt like he was chasing ghosts. Back at home, the atmosphere grew colder. Karen's presence felt invasive. The silent footsteps near his garden, the occasional glint of a camera lens from her porch. His neighbors grew quieter, their eyes darting away when he approached. One evening, John caught sight of Karen meeting with a man he'd never seen before. A sharply dressed stranger who looked more like a lawyer than a neighbor. Their hushed conversation ended abruptly when John appeared, and the man slipped away. Fear gnawed at him. Karen wasn't just fighting for land, she was playing a bigger game, with players John didn't understand. But John had one thing on his side: the truth. And he was determined to uncover every hidden secret beneath the soil, no matter the cost. John never expected the local homeowners association to become a weapon in Karen's arsenal, but as the weeks dragged on, it became painfully clear that Karen had more influence than anyone suspected, and she was using it to tighten the noose around John's neck. It started with small things. Notices taped to his front door demanding he remove unauthorized structures, warnings about violations of community standards, fines for alleged code breaches. His garden shed was supposedly too tall, the hedge too overgrown. John was baffled. None of these rules had ever been enforced before. His neighbors had sheds twice as big, and the hedge had been there for years. Then came the official HOA meeting, one John dreaded attending. The small room was packed with familiar faces, many of whom avoided his gaze. Karen sat at the front, composed and poised, her expression unreadable. The HOA president, a stern woman named Gloria, opened the meeting with a list of complaints filed against John. Multiple violations of property guidelines, Gloria announced, glancing at John. Several neighbors have expressed concerns about Mr. Harper's fence, encroaching on adjacent properties. John's throat tightened. The room buzzed with whispers, and a few heads nodded in agreement. Karen stood. Her voice was calm but icy. I only want what's rightfully mine. The HOA rules exist to protect us all. John wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the room's cold atmosphere silenced him. The unspoken message was clear. John was the problem. After the meeting, John's phone was flooded with calls. Some from concerned neighbors, others from strangers, offering help, but with vague conditions attached. Then, one afternoon, John came home to find a sealed letter from the HOA informing him that his water supply would be cut off until he resolved his violations. Panic surged through him. How was he supposed to live without water, without support? He called Gloria, demanding an explanation. We have to enforce the rules equally, Gloria said smoothly. Until your property issues are settled, services are on hold. John felt trapped. It wasn't just Karen anymore. The HOA had become an institution working against him. He confided in Lisa, the surveyor, who had become one of his few allies. Karen's playing the long game, Lisa warned. She's got friends in high places. You're up against more than just a neighbor dispute. Determined not to be beaten, John reached out to other neighbors, trying to rally support, but fear had taken root. No one wanted to cross Karen or the HOA. One evening, as John sat in his dry, empty kitchen, he heard footsteps outside. Peering through the window, he saw Karen standing by the fence, holding a thick envelope. She raised her voice, loud enough for John to hear. This is the final warning. Vacate the property, or we'll take further action. John's jaw clenched. The war wasn't just about land. It was about power, control, and a relentless opponent who would stop at nothing. That night, as he lay awake in the dark, John realized that winning this fight would mean exposing the tangled web of secrets binding Karen, the HOA, and the community together. But how deep did the corruption go? And how far was Karen willing to go to claim what she wanted? John couldn't shake the feeling that beneath Karen's cold exterior lay something darker, a secret she was desperately trying to protect. After weeks of stonewalling and harassment, he decided it was time to dig deeper, not just into the land dispute, but into Karen herself. He started by retracing Karen's background, combing through public records and social media, looking for anything that might explain her obsession with his property. What he found was unsettling. Karen wasn't just a wealthy newcomer. She had a history of legal battles over properties in other states, battles she always seemed to win, no matter the cost to neighbors or previous owners. There were rumors of shady deals, of partnerships with powerful developers and mysterious corporations. But what caught John's attention most was an old news article from a decade ago, buried deep in an archive. It mentioned a controversial land deal involving a developer named Frank Callahan, a name he'd heard whispered in the neighborhood, the man who Karen had met with weeks ago. The article detailed how Callahan had attempted to buy and redevelop several properties, but had run into fierce community resistance. The deal fell apart under suspicious circumstances, but the damage had been done. John's gut told him Karen's claim on his land was no accident. It was part of a larger, calculated plan. Determined, John paid a visit to the county clerk's office again, this time focusing on property transfer records linked to Callahan and Karen. As he sifted through the files, he uncovered a startling document, a private agreement from years ago between Karen's family and a previous owner of John's land. The agreement wasn't registered publicly. It was a secret contract that gave Karen's family rights of first refusal to buy certain parcels if they ever came up for sale. But the language was vague and the conditions unclear. John's hands shook as he read. It was enough to fuel Karen's legal claim, yet ambiguous enough to spark a prolonged battle. Frustrated but armed with new evidence, John confronted the HOA president, Gloria, during a rare moment when she was alone at a community event. "Gloria, I know Karen's behind this, but I've found documents that show this is more than just a property dispute. There's a secret deal, and it's influencing everything." Gloria's face tightened, and for a moment, her polished facade cracked. "I'm just following the rules, John," she said coldly. "Sometimes, the truth is messy. The HOA can't pick sides." John didn't believe her. He sensed the rot beneath the surface, that the HOA was a tool, controlled by people with interests far beyond the neighborhood. That night, John's house was hit again. This time, his garden gate was ripped off its hinges. The vandalism was brazen, meant to intimidate. As he surveyed the damage, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or this will get worse." John stared at the screen, his resolve hardening. Karen wasn't just after his land. She was trying to bury the truth, and John was the only one standing in her way. John's world was closing in fast. Karen's relentless campaign of intimidation was becoming impossible to ignore, and the HOA's complicity only made the fight seem hopeless. Every door he knocked on was met with silence or wary looks. Even the few neighbors who sympathized hesitated to get involved. Desperate and running out of options, John decided to turn to an unexpected place, the local newspaper, maybe exposing Karen's tactics and the HOA's corruption could rally public support or at least put pressure on the powers behind the scenes. He reached out to a reporter named Lisa Monroe. Known for digging deep into community scandals, Lisa was intrigued and agreed to meet. During their meeting, John laid out everything: the fence, the eviction notice, the strange property documents, the HOA's role, and the mysterious man Karen had been meeting. Lisa listened carefully, taking notes and asking pointed questions. When John mentioned the secret agreement and the threats, her expression darkened. "This goes beyond a simple neighbor dispute," Lisa said. "I'll start digging into Karen and the HOA's connections." Feeling a flicker of hope, John thanked her and handed over copies of the documents he'd collected. That night, while John tried to sleep, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust." He wondered if it was Karen again, or someone else watching his every move. The next day, Lisa's first article hit the local newsstands, exposing the HOA's questionable enforcement actions and Karen's aggressive tactics. The story caused a stir, and for a moment, John felt the tide might be turning. But that evening, something unexpected happened. John's next-door neighbor, an older man named Mr. Simmons, knocked on his door. Mr. Simmons was usually quiet, keeping to himself, but tonight his eyes were sharp. "I've lived here for over 30 years, he said quietly. "I've seen Karen before she moved in, and I know what she's capable of." John invited him in. Mr. Simmons revealed that Karen's family had ties to a powerful land development company, the same one linked to Frank Callahan. Years ago, they tried to buy out many properties in the area, but some owners, including John's ancestors, had resisted. "Karen's not just fighting for a fence line," Mr. Simmons said gravely. "She wants control over this whole neighborhood." Here, handed John an old dusty ledger filled with names and transactions. including some that weren't in the public record. The ledger hinted at deals made behind closed doors. Deals that had changed hands without the community's knowledge. John's mind spun. This was bigger than a property dispute. It was a battle for the soul of the neighborhood, with new evidence and a tentative ally by his side. John realized he wasn't alone, but Karen's next move would prove just how far she was willing to go, and how dangerous this fight had become. The tension in the neighborhood had reached a boiling point, with the local news now spotlighting Karen's aggressive tactics and the HOA's questionable enforcement. John felt both emboldened and vulnerable. The ledger Mr. Simmons had given him was a treasure trove of hidden transactions, exposing the web of secret deals linking Karen's family and the development company to several properties, including ones the HOA had quietly overseen changing hands. It was clear the entire community had been manipulated by powerful forces. John and Lisa worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and testimonies from neighbors who finally felt brave enough to speak out. The tide was turning. Then one morning, Karen showed up at John's doorstep, her expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you to last this long," she said, voice icy, but tinged with something else. Respect? Defiance? John stood his ground. "You've been lying to everyone. The HOA, the neighbors, even yourself. This isn't about land. It's about control." Karen smiled, a hint of bitterness in her eyes. "Control is everything in this world. You just didn't have the guts to play the game." Before John could respond, the front doorbell rang. Lisa and a small group of neighbors arrived, holding copies of the ledger and evidence. The confrontation was public, with cameras rolling and voices rising. The HOA president, Gloria, was cornered, her calm facade breaking as she was pressed to explain her actions. Under pressure, Gloria admitted to covering up transactions and bending rules, all under Karen's influence. But then came the real twist. Karen's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and paled. "Frank Callahan," she muttered, "the man behind so much of the neighborhood's turmoil." After a tense call, Karen turned to John and the group. "I can't keep fighting this," she said, voice strained. "Callahan is pulling out of the deal. The development company is facing an investigation. Your evidence helped expose their corruption." The room fell silent. John felt a surge of disbelief and triumph. The nightmare that had gripped him for months was finally unraveling. Karen hesitated, then offered a surprising truce. "Maybe this neighborhood deserves a fresh start. I'm willing to drop the claims if you agree to work together on rebuilding trust." John considered the offer. The battle had taken its toll, but maybe this was the chance to heal. He nodded. In the weeks that followed, the HOA leadership changed. Reforms were implemented, and the community slowly began to recover. John's family reclaimed their rightful place, and Karen, though no longer a threat, remained a complex part of the neighborhood's story. A reminder of what power and greed could nearly destroy. John stood in his garden one afternoon, watching children play and neighbors chat. The fence was repaired, the gate fixed, and life was returning to normal. But he knew the scars remained, a silent testament to a fight that had tested every ounce of his courage, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not just over land, but over the soul of a community.